Welcome, 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 everyone, to another adventure into reality. Once again, I am joined by my intrepid co-host, Martina GrübMueller.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, guys. Good to be here.
Oh, wonderful for you to be here, too. All right, Martina, today we are going to be talking about emotions in the great universe and sea of expression.
Yeah, sailing the oceans of emotions.
Yes.
Get on board. Who's to come on board and sail with us?
So, what direction do we want to put our ship on the oceans of emotions?
Well, yes. So let's start from the beginning. Emotions. Where do they come from? Why do we have any?
Unique question. When we were still very young, programmable DNA skin suits without great awareness in us, a founder species was looking to create a form of technology that could self-educate, self-procreate, create its own resources and create its own infrastructure that didn't need to be overseen, so that it could repeat a process over many generations, and that each generation would learn from the previous generation so they could do their jobs better. So a self-advancing, self-evolving system. What it needed was something that was not a standard dopamine release, but allowed the DNA programmable experience to have something very intense. An emotion like love keeps people bonded to a family unit, and those family units are always procreating offspring. So emotions were brought in there as a part of adding to the depth of the experience of the soul energy that was going into them. Because part of the Anunnaki's original process was to get the background soul frequencies, which are super young spirits that are in 1 and 2 dimensions of reality, to become 3-dimensional manifested beings inside a skin suit, from dog to cat to human to amoeba.
Okay.
So part of human harvesting is advanced souls coming into bodies regularly and very young souls making their first avatar.
So emotions are obviously part of polarity, charge and polarity.
Yes,
right?
Part charge and polarity that's both good and bad and indifferent.
Yeah. And for the purpose of awakening, for the purpose of evolution, for the purpose of this whole experiment that we're going through, consciousness getting to know itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now, what else is there actually in charge and polarity? If it's not just emotions, right?
So charge and polarity is a technology, and our DNA skin suit is a technology, and they are sharing a source code of how to take source and divest it into individualization.
So how is charge and polarity its own technology?
Because of individualization of the I am. The I am creates a judgment engine that can create belief energy to manifest in a reality.
Right. Okay. So part of us getting out of charge and polarity means that we're now getting out of emotions as well.
No, it means you're no longer allowing the emotions to have long-term attachments. There is an emotional state in sacred neutral, but it's an in-the-moment somatic experience that is a frequency clearing, healing, and a variety of other upgrades and downloads and things that it all depends on what's going on in the body at that time.
Okay. So it's an emotion without entanglement, which cannot be targeted, cannot be harvested and taken advantage of.
Correct. Thus why individualization of the I am, individualizing ourselves from the collective whole, gives us a sovereign identity in which free will technology can be expressed through the I am technology.
Okay. And part of how we're doing that is finding our connection to our own heart space discernment, right? Connecting the complexity of the brain, the heart, and the gut.
That's the starting point of where the I am began, is I amness. It earned some little aspect of it as a fetus in the womb. And then on first, second, and third birth, I amness begins to grow. And by age 9 to 11, I amness is usually fully invested into the DNA, meaning they figured out what part of the main plane, their free will is going to try to follow.
Okay. So with regards to the harvesting of those emotions, we obviously making a distinction here between positive and negative emotions, but
yes.
Is there really such a thing?
In our reality, yes. In other realities, they aren't seen as positive or negative. They're seen as an activation-based experience, and it may activate and catalyze you into many different branches of expression.
So emotions being energy in motion. So it could be a laugh, a blissful laugh that creates a huge intensity of energy that could be equally negative to an off-worlder that is not used to emotions, obviously, than what we call an anger burst out, correct?
Right. So we are 50 color experiencing time DNA skin suits. That's our potentiality. And many emotions already operate in the 8th, 9th, and 10th colors of experience. We just don't realize how our emotions affect the unseen world around us. And when we have the greater expression of seeing how our energy is expressed in the unseen world around us and how the unseen world expresses to us, then we can live to learn in natural balance again instead of the unnatural way we live now. With natural way as part of our growing process, the way the unseen world affects us and the way we affect the unseen world will ultimately determine how we want to generate emotions, both positive and negative. Because there are times we must experience the negative emotions to overcome it and heal from it.
So emotions are basically portals to different dimensions, right? To help us connect, not help us connect, but teach.
Yes, I don't know if portals is the right word, but that's the only word we have right now. You enter a space, so completionism is potential in those emotional, unresolved emotional states.
So would you say that when we talk about the sacred neutral perspective, that type of emotion, is that conducive and important to entertain in order to connect to the off-worlder, if we want to start communicating?
So mastering that aspect of your personality is part of the greater things we do to keep raising our frequencies. But learning how to be in that state just takes practice, an experienced practice for you to really know that state. And everyone enters that practice of acknowledging the infinite unseen world differently. But when you ritualize and ceremonialize and validate the truths that you've gone through hindsight and foresight, which is doing the practices as a daily basis, so they have an aggregate change in your overall life.
So it's a little bit like the vibration teaching, right? Where we keeping ourselves in the body long enough and holding that level of light, if you wish, for long enough over a certain period of time in order to allow ourselves to start communications to happen. Right.
Naturally,
exactly.
Oftentimes that requires a pilgrimage away from what is normal from you into a place that represents a higher connective state, and you going through the acceptance process of bringing that accepted energetic state within you. So you enter the flow of experience.
Yeah. And what happens on a pilgrimage is you disentangle from the distraction and the instant gratification that allows you to connect to that innate state of being, isn't it? Because that's what we actually innately have. It's just all the belief system and all the crap overlaid, all the programming overlaid of obviously the DNA structure and coding that we have in order to connect to everything in this universe and beyond.
So consciousness and emotions don't always go hand in hand. There are certain built-in limitations to emotions that will sidetrack the greater experience. And humanity has had all sorts of sidetrack things put into their DNA, such as deep ancestral lineage programs that prevent mating with another race, the overwhelming desire to mate within your race, and that's like a pre-programmed DNA thing. And as the new children have whole new ways of perception, the crossing over of all lineages is not the muttering down of the pure. It is the pure when they're all equal.
Mm-hmm.
No one is greater than the other.
Yes. So once we go into that space that we have no hierarchy, no competition, no duality, no one is greater than the other, we start actually releasing all that energy that we have been toning down quite a bit because of all this programming. So, okay, so the question would be, what happens beyond our day-to-day emotional activity? What can we actually do once we get out of that charge and polarity part? What are we going to do with that energy?
Implement the teachings you've already learned in that state, so that a form of enthusiastic effort is the fuel. Is enthusiasm an emotion?
For me, it is, yes.
Okay. Well, actualize and activate the enthusiastic emotion when you're in the sacred neutral state of practicing your daily work.
So what does that look like? What does it look like to activate the enthusiasm in a sacred neutral state? Because that for me still sounds a bit like an oxymoron, right?
It's a freedom where no choice has the limitation to the nature of the experience.
Is it a knowingness?
It becomes it's earned as a knowingness as you go through the expression of what that state truly means for the conscious being of entangled time-space reality.
Right.
That is a whole bunch of other time-space equations, not just this one.
Right. Because I can perceive the difference between the energy of passion and enthusiasm and knowingness. There is much more space attached to that one.
So guilt-free, in the joy of learning state, all of those are the right words to describe that state of being. Everyone achieves it differently. You are entering that state much more aware of what the potentiality, how truly potent this energy can be.
So do we have some words that we can use that actually identify those energies we can already, which we already do, probably haven't acknowledged yet, or we can at least look forward to?
All right, so I'm going to play a little wordy Smith game with you.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the word moxie?
No.
Do you know what it means?
Not really. Tell me.
And anybody in the chat room know
Moxie.
what the word moxie? This person has a lot of moxie.
How do you spell it? M-O?
XXIE. Or M-O-X-I-E. Yeah.
I know Foxy.
Okay. Do you know chutzpah?
No. But anyway, tough, strong. I get it. Moxie,
Okay.
yeah?
Moxie is it, but it's an actual reference to 1920s soda makers where there was a root beer, a very tangy root beer called Moxie. And that is how advertising has influenced. Now, the word Moxie is just the name of a drink, but it has become a very popular word of being used for a courageous, strong person, etc.
All right.
Okay. So how has this word been recreated as something totally different?
Just through the use, through application.
As well as allowing us to have emotional attachments to people and having moxie moments. The underdog winning, the great story coming to an end, the hero's journey.
But you know, that's really cool, because when you use words like that, and okay, I'm not familiar with it, so I can really perceive the potency of this word in the new application beyond emotions, because all the other stuff is so fear, sadness, it's just so ingrained in us, and it brings up associations. But this one doesn't actually, at least for me, does not bring up, but I can feel the expansiveness in that one. That's really cool.
So can a sacred neutral being have moxie? Yes. They can. They can have enthusiasm. They can have moxie. They are just running unattached to the need of moxie or the other subject matters that are our adverbal descriptions of the action.
Yes.
Okay.
But by doing that, they stay out of harvesting, they stay out of entanglement, and they can actually start using that energy that they are creating innately through the DNA skin suit for creation on a completely different level, right?
Yes. And then there are whole other layers of expression where unobserved emotions create invisible storehouses that often act like termites' nests in people's frequencies.
Give us an example, because that's not a good thing.
Child abuse, and they actively shove down the memories and don't deal with them.
Okay.
Advanced avoidance, the river in Egypt becoming a river in Egypt for them, denial.
Isn't that still part of the old way of dealing or not dealing with emotions?
No, the way the lineage is earned without dealing with emotions, because a lot of that's passed on.
So where does free will come into all of that?
It's imprinted into the fetus at womb blueprint that this is the architectural plan. You may not use all the materials to create it, and you may make different choices and create something else within it, but their fundamentals remain this. And the emotional states from our learning of our fundamentals determines how the other details of our free will apply. Because that's our youngest age, or the earliest expressions of learning to deal with our emotions. What do pent up emotions generally do? Blow up.
Yes. Well, if we're not releasing them, yes.
Because they're so potent energy, the slightest spark of observation will set them off.
But this is where, I use that expression of being that powerhouse, being that energy factory, if you wish, right?
But the choice to use the energy factory means you've got to be willing to feed the factory.
Yes.
Look at a big factory out there. It's got like 20, 30 doors where tractor trailers pull up and park and unload stuff.
So in the old way of looking at emotion, that would be provided for by trauma and drama, right? Now,
anything unresolved, where energy is charge and polarity is being stored for later debate, argument, or avoidance.
Yeah, which is the whole concept of right or wrong, really, the whole concept of judgment.
Yep.
So once we get out of judgment and we start changing our emotions and all become a bit more moxie, then how do we then fuel our factories, if you wish?
By having a forecast of what we want to create within the capacity of us actually creating, setting goals at a close enough bar of accurate success instead of setting goal bars that are unmeetable, which is the greater self-defeating habit pattern of humanity. They set the goals and sets too high because they don't have so many of the fundamentals mastered in the emotional challenges.
So that takes us into the realm of awareness and choice,
which is a practice state of being.
Yes. So could we say that the opposite, not the opposite, but lack of all type of emotions are leading us into creating from awareness and from choice?
So creating from awareness and choice can be a reactionary conscious aspect of us. And people may not realize they're being run by their sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they're in only a very small amount. They're in their body like 30%, but they're still giving away their voting rights. Yeah, I don't want to vote. I'm an absentee energy spirit. I come and go as whenever I want. When you actively learn into be your body, and the goal is to get that 100% and to learn what is actively keeping you out of your body, and then going through the cancel, cure, and deletion process that it requires to take those out of your autonomic response system of making a reactionary reality, instead of a co-creative reality, or there's a clear other side operating with your infinite God source.
Yeah. And I think you just made that a great point here. I think staying in your body, being grounded, is key.
Yes.
Is key if you want to change your emotional states. You know, if you want to actually clear out the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Otherwise, you'll be run by it.
Or worse.
Yeah.
Or worse.
Invaded. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So I
want to add a little layer here.
Yes.
So before we were talking about the Anunnaki and the bringing of emotions onto the DNA skin suit. Well, we weren't the only car DNA skin suit, we'll just call it ancestral vehicle of debt transference. We weren't the only model that was out there. There are other models that are out there. They just don't operate as good as ours. So the Anunnaki tried to figure out how to get high-powered emotions into lower frequency experiencing beings. And this created its own galaxy of war-based personalities. Aggressive, take, forced evolution beings. And a whole galaxy was populated by the tens of thousands of varieties of what happened after that DNA manipulation.
Yeah. But I mean, that was
the emotions were fueling the primal need to dominate. In the very beginning there, and I think the reptilians were involved in all of that too, right? In shaping all that. No, they're
survival.
They're more the inheritors of many other generations that had did it and passed the torch to them for the next generation.
Mm-hmm. So if we talk about then the Anunnaki, what basically it was all about using the emotions to create the charge and polarity to allow that evolution, right?
Even though in some of the other experiences, the emotions were bringing in such higher frequency than the body could experience, it would create unique beings who could have very powerful psychic abilities, brutal telepathic abilities.
So could we say the first emotion, probably the most dominant one at the time, was fear, because it was connected to survival and death?
No. Believe it or not, it was love that was used in a very negative way to suppress people.
Talk a bit more about that.
So this is the initial weaponization of DNA skin suits that had gone through a change. Now, a lot of the Anunnaki gave this DNA technology to them, knowing full well, we'll wait a few hundred years and then we got you. Okay, but once a few generations passed and then they really realized the long-term effects of the DNA changes, then they can offer them all their DNA that keeps them going further and further down the rabbit hole of changing their DNA and never getting it back to its original source.
Mm-hmm. Because it starts. Sorry.
So thousands of species were led down the despeciations of themselves.
So what did love turn into?
It broke soul families from wide groups to very narrow groups of experience that operated a deadly protective system around it, just like a virus will protect itself.
And from that destruction of love, distortion of love for the purpose of evolution and beyond, we then got all the other negative, that what we consider negative emotion source, like fear and frustration and anger and all
many
of that.
Many of them stemmed out of that original weaponization of a love experience, because they were truly manipulating the incarnational world, because they had figured out the parts of the infinite codes. That's what the Anunnaki had mastered as is they knew there was a soul commerce market, and they had created a technology that could tap into it somewhat and have awareness that this soul is coming from a solar system tens of millions of years away. How did it get here? There's some transgalactic transfer system, and they painstakingly mapped out the soul-based commerce between star systems.
But isn't that also what makes us now? Having
yes,
all the
because we are a byproduct of their greatest work. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But while they were here, some of the other work that wasn't their greatest work became a part of our oral traditions and histories. Centaurs, griffins,
giants.
No,
what about the giants?
Well, the giants were a real species that came here, but and then their DNA, you could never get it out of the population. That's why they kept wiping the planet out, because somebody had spoiled the farm.
So weren't the giants actually opposing all of that and coming in with parting wisdom by,
other than the fact the great many of them were cannibals. So how good can a cannibal really be?
I've been hearing that they used their knowledge to use the vibration with music and everything to work with the ice, and
they were still a predatorial species. Their culture related around predatorial concepts, which influenced their ideologies greatly.
Okay.
So some of these emotions that we have are purposely triggered emotions. Example, when a predator wants you to do something, it wants you to feel disempowered until you give off a pheromone that the rest of the reality can sense. That's a surrendering energy. That's a natural experience that we all have. The predators have learned how to manipulate that state and use that for energy harvesting.
Yeah. It's very similar to the animal and to the plant kingdom, actually, isn't it?
Same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that pheromone then would, obviously, because we're using language, would then come out through the speech and really create those negative emotions as we consider negative.
So the pheromone is like a psychic scent that everyone smells. And if everyone's sharing the common taint, it's very easily experienceable. Now, there are many giants out there, so we can't just homogenize them all into good or bad, because there were good ones, there were bad ones, there are indifferent ones, there are time travelers, so on and so forth. And then there are ones that are completely not DNA related, yet they look similar, but their DNA came from a completely different origin source.
And is it true that they live more in the colder areas, Siberia, Canada, North Pole?
There was a group of them that did that, and then there were groups of them that would time travel. They could come into an area for a year or two and then have to time travel again to avoid detection. So they would just travel through space and time, being timeline nomads. And then the portals were closed down and the rift wars began, and that's what eliminated the rest of the giants doing what's called great long-term dimensional walks, because they were interdimensional as well as extraterrestrial.
Right. Because before the rift wars, those portals were easily accessible for those beings, correct?
No, they were much highly guarded back then. They've reached a state of disrepair where the crystalline technology had to be regularly retuned and refined. They've purposely let that stuff fall apart, though, because they're able to harvest everyone's belief about Hollow Earth and alternate dimensions a different way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So they're obviously still living in Hollow Earth, right?
Well, as I've said before, there's tens of thousands of species that live in Hollow Earth.
Yeah.
And we almost just start thinking at a much grander scale.
Mm.
The awakening's not just about you.
Yes.
There's a whole other world of conscious aware beings of choice that are a part of it too.
Yeah. So how is what about emotions in Hollow Earth then? Because I mean they're fighting each other all the time, so they must have a different level of emotions.
So once again, it's how the emotion intensifies the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience can be an hour long, a month long, it can be 1 second, but it's how it permeates the remembrance journey. If it's a bright light, it'll be easily remembered versus a dull memory.
Mm-hmm.
And then how that light flickers in a particular flicker rate that will instantly activate the infinite awareness of that subject source, activates the knowingness.
So how does one deal best with emotions then, other than not simmering in them, just getting out of them?
There are tens of thousands of techniques. Practice a handful, and then learn another handful, and then learn another handful. And then you will put some real enthusiastic effort into advancing yourself.
Yeah. I mean,
Do not become monotechnique-ish. That's the worst thing you can do for yourself. Learn as many techniques as you can.
yeah.
Learn how to hybrid and make them all into one experience.
And cover all the areas, the mind, the body, and the spirit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, that's basically the work that we are.
As well as the 3D human being that has to be the mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah. That's that inner work and self-mastery we're actually talking about, right?
Yeah. Yes. As getting on the path to self-responsibility.
Yeah. And once we're on that path, we're going all into the new direction beyond emotional, entanglement. We can then start becoming those galactic guardians, right?
Well, there'll be a time where we learn to use emotions as daily operating fuel.
Let's talk about that.
So there comes a point when we've achieved enough natural living that we can allow streams of energy to flow through us at a higher rate. And for an hour, if we want to have a heated debate and conversation with our loved one, we can. But when we're done, we're not attached to the outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's
it allows
actually
cyclical exploration, yes.
That's a very good tip to deal with emotions, Handling them means, allow them and snap out of it as soon as you're done.
What you were asking before about the hollow earth emotions and how they experience emotions differently is many of them are already at the point where they don't have an attachment to the next argument. They may have a minor attachment to the debate and argument itself of what is right within their ideological belief and platform. So emotions are wide varieties of them. But when you have hundreds of things that can be emotional triggers to you, there are certain combinations that can make charge and polarity out of phase with the hollow earth being. And when you have out of phase energy like rage, it builds up into an instantaneous avalanche of vengeance as a reaction to something instead of an actionary being. And that oftentimes happens in the hollow earth.
Yes. But even that can be solution oriented, right? That can lead to
absolutely solution oriented. Yes. It's a matter of personal, even at that level, personal practice, use of technological clearing systems too.
And if we take this into our surface, if you wish, how do we deal with that intensity? It's a matter of being able to receive that type of intensity.
That reception is a choice, and that choice has many layers of acceptance within it.
So one layer would be, can you receive it? Can you accept it? Can you allow it without it doing any harm to you?
And then the actualization of doing it and experiencing it for an extended period of time.
Yes.
Which is the ongoing valuation of the experience.
And then flipping the frequency, because that's a possibility too, right?
Right. Because there are a lot of people that are in these ongoing experiences that they believe are high frequency, but in fact, because they've been repeating for them so long, have become much lower frequency. That's why they have to learn new techniques.
Well, one of them techniques, getting yourself out of the situations, but then that's, just the short-term solution, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking, what do you do when you get stuck? Motivate. But you also have to have a clear strategical plan. A lot of people faux a plan, okay? And when I mean faux, it's not really a plan. And then they realize they've been running the no plan for so long that they have to get off the no plan and make a plan, which is very hard for them because they've been lazy on the no plan for a long time.
Yeah, this is where the courage, I suppose, comes in. The courage and the trust and the determination not to give up.
A lot of people are getting used to low frequency. They accept it as the new mediocre. It's better than what they had before.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that comes with the frustration then. That's frustration energy, but the frustration energy itself is an invitation for them to get back onto the growing path and get out of it. Mm-hmm. So I see as frustration for me is positive because it's almost like it's a little bell ringing saying, hey, there's something you're stuck in. Get out of it. What can you do to get out of this?
Mm-hmm. If they can even see that.
Yes.
So people were asking, what's the difference between the no plan and flow plan? The flow plan is still the no plan in action until you've actually made a plan, thought it through, and used the totality of your genius applied to it, just like you would with any of the airy-fairy other subject matters that you would redo your mental research on. If you put the same amount of effort in, we realize how effective the plan will be at getting you victory, success, and the flow of energy at the proper rates. Because the other thing is people spend energy on emotions that's useless wastes of energy.
And I just want to say something to that is once you start getting out of it, it's a very weird place to be. It's the space. It's almost like you don't know what to do with it in the beginning, and you want to just crawl back into the box of emotions because it's so familiar. And don't do it. And even if you do it, come back out of it. You be aware that that's what you're doing and actually allow yourself to enjoy that space. And you don't have to do anything with that space. We're so used to being so conditioned and contracted. So breathe into the space and know this is what you have created. You've worked for that space. So just be that expansiveness.
So a lot of people run into this situation, I'm awake, now what? Now, people hear me say this all the time, now what? Well, what do you do with your awakened energy? That requires a plan, which says, hindsight, what have I learned about myself? Foresight, what can I perceive about myself with my hindsight so that I can put forth a plan that is going to advance all of the intentions I want within myself today?
Yes, and you know what? I've never said I'm awake. You can take that out. Just take out that definition. That's what you are, what you think you are. And as soon as you let go of the definition, you're back to scratch in the body, and you just do whatever you need to do at the time.
Yeah, a lot of people when they go through the awaken thing, they get disassociated with themselves and can't identify with being them anymore.
Yes. And it's a weird place to be, but that's what I call this space. It's different. It's beyond definition. And what if you can just allow that? It's almost like, practicing cycling with the wheels. We are getting all to this place now where beyond emotion, get your practice bicycle, get the practice wheels back out on again.
Mm-hmm. Those that are missing the motivation to do that, they've got other inner work to make motivation work for them.
Yes.
Okay? A lot of people are in that, I can't get the engine started. There's no fuel. Okay, or there's plenty of fuel and no spark plugs. Okay? If there's no spark plugs, you're still not a complete cycle. You're not a complete engine. All this excess fuel is there wasting away, oftentimes creating a trauma pattern of holding in your energy field.
And again, I'm going back to judgment, because as soon as you go into the right or wrongness of what that is, then you're already back caught in the control and in everything. Don't control any of that. Just, it is what it is. I love that. It is what it is. Can you deal with that in that moment?
When you have the now what, you go to, how do I feel in this moment?
Yeah.
Who am I in this moment? Know thyself journey.
And there's something else to that, because when you are in that space, it's called space for a reason, because you're starting to connect to much bigger places and spaces than you have connected before. So your perception increases. So awareness is a bit of a bitch, because the more aware you become, the more information you are perceiving.
As well as responsible for.
Exactly.
Your awareness is equal to your level of responsibility, and your level of responsibility is equal to your awareness. And when we work outside of those bounds, we take on responsibilities oftentimes we can't understand or take on, yet we still have done it out of conscious free will choice. That's why curiosity learning leads so many people down the path of an incomplete life.
Yes. And there's this other coined phrase, tacit consent again, where so much we are tacitly consenting in unawareness. I mean, it's called awareness for a reason. You've got to really, as you start walking in through that portal, through that gateway into that huge vastness of perception, and you leave those limiting emotions behind you, you got to be extra vigilant of what's coming at you. But this is what we're working for. And anybody who wants to be awakened or enlightened or whatever you want to call it, this is then the opportunity to actually start connecting beyond surface.
As a conscious being of a choice and awareness.
Yes.
Building that strength to be that in the body.
And it's not a constant, you don't stay there. Yeah. If you go back and forth, because we are still human beings and will always be as long as we are here and breathing. So it's a matter of acknowledging where you're at any moment. I love using the crystallization process. It's like crystallizing up and down, changing your vibration, your frequency, your harmony, and then using it. It's almost like the celestial medium work, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's an earned state where you know that's the next part of your journey.
And stay out of the little box. When you get too big, it's like, whoa, where am I going with this? Stay there. Don't crawl back.
Exactly. Learning how to not go back into the turtle shell.
Yeah.
It's a huge teaching for many people. There is using the turtle shell as a backdrop of your state of awareness. You can't do that anymore.
And it's conditioning. That is conditioning.
The conditioning is what makes it easy. Yeah.
Okay, so what purpose is it? What's the value for people to go back into the tortoise shell?
It makes it a lot easier for the system to control you.
Yes, but what's the purpose for them to consistently do it, other than just not wanting to take responsibility?
It is submission and tacit consent, an allowing of a future where you're not in your body, but still being harvested as an infinite source.
Yeah, but there's still, and the value. Sometimes what I sometimes find with people who are consistently going back is it's a matter of not acknowledging their potency.
Well, that's the major valuation of self-worth too, when you don't value your potency, which is another control feature here. which was integrated into the Anunnaki stuff. They needed to make sure that their new workforce felt needed, even though it never met an Anunnaki ever in its whole life. Felt wanted and connected. Well, that's why they created a faith-based system, which hijacked another side of spiritual commerce.
Yes, and you can still change that. We can still change that.
Absolutely.
That is part of the evolution. I mean, that teaching of this is for me empowerment. This is pure empowerment, getting yourself back into acknowledging the potency, because and not being afraid of it. I see so many people be afraid of their powers, because once you get to that space state we were talking about, you know, beyond those day-to-day emotions, those programs, you start recognizing you are actually quite potent. I like to call it potent rather than power, because power often is misapplied.
And that potent power is a choice to use. And as people are growing into that, many discover that they don't have the courage to stay there because they've never challenged themselves out of the mediocrity before.
And a lot of that, okay, well, at that level of clearing, do we still talk about the past lives where they have been obviously, you know, cauterized and beheaded and, you know, killed for their potency?
So 50% of the life may be that, but not much more. So what's the rest the person resolved for this lifetime? This lifetime is always more important. Yes, and there are those few that have past life, major past life things, but what they led, they didn't follow the common grain of what the main generations were doing as industrialization took over. And they had to change the way that they were growing families. It's at the soul family level. It became harder and harder to find somebody that could love you and have a farm and all this wonderful stuff on it without warlords.
And that's all part of that courage, right?
To reach that naturally empowered state.
And getting and knowing that you do deserve all that, you know, coming out of that old idiotic thinking that you don't deserve. That's one of our childhood conditionings, isn't it? I don't deserve to be potent and powerful. Yes, you are. And it doesn't matter how old you are.
That's right.
So empathy, somebody just mentioned empathy there. We have obviously talked about empathy on many, many occasions, but empathy is almost like a container, right? For all those different emotions.
It can be. As I've described, empathy is the lowest state of all psychic skills, the lowest of the lowest of the lowest.
The lowest of the lowest.
And oftentimes people make that be the highest through oversensitivity. And what it does is just ends up kicking them out of their body.
Yes, it hasn't got a timestamp on it, you know.
How about we end up taking a caller, Robert? So we want people to go ahead and raise your hand if you want to be a caller in today's show. We ask that you please we only call in once a month, so everyone else gets a chance. Let's give it a moment here to let people come in. All right, Robert, let's spin up the wheel of callers and see who we got first.
Okay. Carrie Yvonne, you're getting a signal to unmute.
Carrie Yvonne, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing
and
pretty
Martina,
good. Where are you calling from today?
Florida.
Florida. So what did you think of what we were talking about today?
Well, I really liked it. I liked how you're tying in a little bit of our galactic history with how it's affecting us now in the present moment.
Well, thank you. Is there any specific questions you wanted to ask us?
Well, you're talking about, I mean, I love everything that you guys talk about. And you're talking about this creative space and how sometimes Martina was mentioning how people tap into this and then they become afraid or perhaps are afraid of their own creative aspects. And I've noticed that it seems like there's this whole new space of like a creative void that we've kind of tapped into and connected into. And I feel like a lot of people I connect with are also tapping into this space. And I was wondering if you guys would talk a little bit about that, if you know what I'm referring to.
I know exactly what you're referring to. That is when the digital age took over. And there is an emotional disconnection from the pre-digital age to the post-digital age. And everyone being forced onto a digital age.
Okay.
Do you remember life before the cell phone?
I do.
Okay. How old were you?
Young in grade school.
Okay. So it has a very different effect on you as opposed to somebody that was 22 when the cell phones came out and it changed partying life forever.
Right.
Okay.
Huh. So this creative space that we're tapping into, you're saying it's digital.
It's what people did before digital life to motivate and activate themselves without Google, without Snapchat, without any of the other weaponized systems of distraction.
So space, why is it? I'm just curious as to why it's become. Is it that we've lined up with it in this particular?
It's become a foreign space that we must learn to operate in again.
Yeah.
It's part of our natural evolution. Technology's just hijacked that journey away from us.
Mm-hmm. And this is part of the reason it's so important. So a lot of people are tapping into it and maybe they don't realize it.
Correct. An unfamiliar space in which they don't know what to do anything in. Thus, the voided energy of creation.
Right.
That's why they feel like they can't create, because it's voided, because they don't know what to do there. They don't know how to harvest energy from that side through inspiration and co-creation.
Mm-hmm. So basically, by everything that you're teaching and going into this heart space and connecting with the earth, it's going to obviously help us tap into that. But it seems like it's so innate and it's been so covered up with all of this digital technology. How can someone tell?
The digital world was designed to hijack the natural experience away from us.
Right.
So there's the extreme, get rid of the digital frequencies, and what does it take for you to reconnect? People have been going out to make cabins in the mountains for centuries. Mm-hmm. Okay. But how can one learn to do that in the concrete jungle?
Right.
That's the ultimate. When the geniuses figure out, when you learn how to do it in the concrete jungle and how to do it right, it will spread like wildfire to everyone.
And when you say it will spread like wildfire to everyone, is that a little bit of like the pheromones you were talking about earlier? Rather than the fear pheromone?
That is a way of showing people how to craft the reality they really want. Mm-hmm. And allowing the crafters to go to work. The doers to do.
And the inner earth that you were speaking about, when you were bringing that up, obviously it's not just about inner earth,
right?
But
it's not just about you. Exactly. It's not just about you.
Yeah.
It's about everything else that's a conscious, aware being of choice, down to the fungus, to the highest angelic being. They're all a part of the awakening. Every one of them. And many of them don't even know they're part of the awakening, are part of the awakening.
Right. So the more we're tapping into this creative energy, which is what you guys have been talking about, but it's become even more available to us, the more of an impact we're having on every single living cell within Earth and beyond. The ripple effect.
The ripple effect, yes.
So how do people, if they are able to tap into this, what would be some signals that they could realize that, hey, I'm tapping into this right
now? Well, first of all, if you're already in a position where you need more validation of the spirit, you're requiring more spiritual validation, and you must look into that as a limitation. Mm-hmm. How do you not feel validated when you do something as contribution and service to the futures?
Mhm. Beyond the validation, I'm just kind of asking.
I know what you're asking. But the nature of the experience is a doing factor, where you're
taking action is what you're saying.
Yeah, taking action.
Yes, I understand. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
For it. Yeah.
And the relevance, right, and then the self-relevance to that self-action.
Right. And recognizing our role in it, or just feeling into it and allowing it to expand our feeling of connectedness.
Yes, but you got to make sure that you don't just repeat the lower ends of the journey, which a lot of people don't realize. They have a greater breadth of experience, but they're too afraid to go beyond their envelope of what they've already experienced.
You mean like things that they've experienced that are,
easily repeatable. Easily repeatable.
Habit patterns.
Yes.
Right. Can you
and then
expand on that a little bit and moving beyond that?
The process of removing those habit patterns is what gives you the validation of source connectedness. You are never not connected to source. You're always connected to source. What is it going to take for you to believe that? Through all the different aspects that have been source disconnected in you.
Right. And by pulling them all in and doing the work, you reconnect to all of those.
Right. Like starting at the fetus in the womb, where your greatest source connectedness was this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Refamiliarizing yourself with that state of entity, that state of beingness.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then you're welcome. And then as we grow older, we've got to see the grown being who we are, who had a blueprint. We got the slap on the ass or 22 injections. Okay. And then they snipped our umbilical cord and said, all right, here you go. We're not going to put you on your mother's heart for a couple of hours. We're going to draw some blood.
Right.
Poke you. Okay. That's our first few hours of the world. Okay.
Well, welcome to Earth.
Welcome to Earth. There's your slap on the ass, your 22 injections, and your foot stamp. Okay.
But when we're going back and doing this work, we're able to clear all of that, as well consciously, and whatever we've kind of kept within us subconsciously and stored in our cellular memory. And that's why we're doing this.
Well, not all cellular memories repeat. Some cellular memory is talent and skill waiting for you to open it like a jack-in-a-box.
Mm-hmm. Without the scary clown.
Right, without the scary clown.
Yes.
Martina, are you back?
Am I? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. Is the quality okay? Good.
It's good enough for right now.
Good enough. Okay, cool.
It's good enough for government work.
Fantastic. Sorry about that.
So it's okay. So did you want to add anything to what you were hearing?
I just want to add one thing. You did mention the being, because we talked about doing, and I do want to add the joy of being, because this is a level you're stepping into when you go beyond that place of, the old emotions, and that really the joy of that beingness. Mm-hmm. And then allowing, when frustration kicks in, allowing yourself to acknowledge there's always a new expression. You experiment with that, you integrate, and then you transcend that, and then you start the next one. These 4 processes will always be there. They might not be necessarily too linear. You can probably go back and forth in those, but having, I don't want to call it patience, but maybe it is patience, commitment, determination.
A commitment to patience.
Yes.
Yeah. I like the fact that you said earlier you guys were referring to hybrid, and it's a hybrid of all of these things, and feeling into the multi-dimensionality that we are embodying. That's what's joyful in this.
Yeah, without creating the attachment to return exactly to where you left off.
I'm sorry, without creating the attachment to returning exactly where you left off?
Correct. That is taking up the old charge and polarity instead of allowing the new perspective to evolve from the new experience.
And that's a little bit of what you were referring to about like the turtle going back into a little
Recessing back.
afraid to take that next step.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Thank you both very much.
You're welcome. You're a great caller.
I appreciate all that you guys do. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot for calling in. All right,
Bye-bye.
Robert, let's spin up the wheel of callers and see who is next.
Hey, Riddy, you are getting a signal to unmute.
Ritty, are you there?
Hello,
Hello, where are you calling from today?
India.
India, welcome to the show. What did you think about what we're talking today?
Thank you, Andrew. Well, it's quite interesting talk. I was just thinking about how emotions affect us in a way then we get stuck, but they're also part of us being progressing in this reality. But it also gets us stuck in this reincarnation pattern.
Yes, that repetition pattern that soul families share as joined experiences. And there are certain reincarnation process that can become detrimental to greater growth, but that's why they're there, because the greater growth is there. But any point in time, the being can choose to leave the karmic journey and enter the dharmic journey through living the good life.
Yeah, but how do we disconnect from that emotions when we get stuck? How do we come to know that we are stuck with those emotions and that it stops us from progressing?
We're never stuck with the emotions unless we're holding on to the attachment of the emotion. So being unattached to the emotion still allows you to store charge and
like
polarity.
Empathy, for example.
Empathy can be easily misused against the self.
Yes, that's true.
It's more a sympathetic base reaction to truth.
Yes, by being empathetic.
By being empathetic through our sympathy. So our sympathetic process. So the sympathetic process is the neural pathways that are helping the CPU of the brain define the experience.
Yes, but when they are overactivated for somebody else as well, when you pick up the emotions of people and then you don't come to know, for example, when you feel you are feeling sick today, or when you are feeling like emotionally drained today and you don't understand that it's your emotion, or you're picking up,
or you are so hypersensitive, or
how do you control that?
Or you must realize you're so hypersensitive to everything in the reality. When a mouse farts next door, you feel it. You have to acknowledge your own oversensitivity.
Do you think then we should create boundaries for that?
Well, first of all, you have to learn how to turn empathy off. Empathy is not a skill that's supposed to be running all the time. It ends up kicking you out of your body instead of being in your body, allowing other people's energies to dirty your light. So the first thing is you have to learn to actively turn off empathy and be in a sympathetic state. Sympathy and empathy are two vastly opposite experiences. In a sympathetic state, we can allow some of our emotions to rule and guide us through our ideological belief journey. Letting go of the attachment of the actual emotion still allows us to store emotion to grow and learn from. It is ultimately attachment to the debate and argument itself of whatever the subject matter is, that human beings get caught up in the ever-present trap of what emotional conversation debatism creates in our modern world, where no one is sharing natural living.
Yeah, that's a very big thing.
Right. Thus, we've got to figure out ways to begin
it becomes very hard for you to.
Sorry, we got a little bit of delay going on here. So when you finish speaking, I just got to give you a second to finish speaking. So go ahead and finish what you were saying.
I was just saying that, like, you asking to like switch off your empathy, and you can stay with your sympathy. That takes you into more softer mode. But when you empathize with yourself, that's the situations created around you. When it makes you lose your child, it makes you lose your partner. Then it becomes hard for oneself to just disconnect with that.
When one empathizes with themselves in that nature, they're torturing themselves out of shame, blame, and guilt. You cannot use empathy to justify sympathy, and you can't use sympathy to justify the empathy or the over-empathization with the subject at all.
There needs to be a line between them.
Right. And you also are overlooking at it. And when you're overlooking at it, you become addicted to its repetition, which is the negative form of karmic resolution, where you're truly not learning anything.
So how do you mean, like, we should just disconnect with all of that and look at it in a biased way, or?
No, it's about disconnecting the individuated attachments to having debate and argue a point of view at all ever. Why do you have to justify, debate, and argue what you believe in? Why do you have to put an energy to someone else to convince them your way is right or your way is your choice? One should not ever have to do that. But that's the greater part of understanding natural living. You don't need to validate who you are. Natural living has helped you define that already. And what you're describing over and over again are the base emotions that you're attached to, and your empathy is so through the roof, you can't individuate the subject, separate and clear them.
True.
So if you're stuck in the chaotic situation and you're trying to put order to chaos, square peg, round hole. Not going to work. Martina, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just like to say, in terms of the solution to get out of that, would be in the acknowledgement of what's actually happening. And the acknowledgement is that you are perceiving. Instead of saying feeling, use the word perceiving. You're perceiving emotions. You're perceiving a stuck state. You're perceiving all of that. That doesn't necessarily mean it's yours. Yeah. And that's a typical access consciousness approach, where they're saying that 99% of the emotions that you are feeling, what if they're not actually yours? So you could make that little tool, you could use that tool every time you are feeling something, change the word to perceiving, and then choose not to take it on. What if that shit is not yours anyway? Yeah. And just by acknowledging that on a daily basis, make this your mantra. Is this really mine, or is it not? And you realize after doing that for a couple of days that the majority of the stuff that you're perceiving is not yours. So don't even try to deal with it. Just send it back. Don't entangle with it. And then see what happens. Then see what happens.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for
Thank you,
calling in.
Andrew.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot for calling in. All right, Robert, let's spin up the wheel of callers and see who is next.
All right, I'm just going for Albert Ortega, getting a signal to unmute.
Albert, are you there? Albert.
Yes, I am here. Hello.
Hi, how you doing today? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from El Paso, Texas.
El Paso, Texas. Welcome to the show. What did you think about what we're talking today?
Very interesting. And with emotions is something that I've always been interested in, because I struggle with emotions. Growing up, I had a tendency of being, very angry, and in learning about how the process of how emotions help us to understand a reality, if I'm mistaken, understanding what the topic has been about, has been very helpful so far. And also wanted to ask, you hear about how emotions help us, I don't know if I'm mistaken understanding, but if you go deep within our emotions, can it not help us activate what Laura Eisenhower calls our junk DNA?
The answer is yes. There's no such thing as junk DNA, and Laura says that all the time. and it's the entering of the state that creates the catalytic source of crystallization of the DNA parts that create new experience forms.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, because I asked that because I am an avid qigong practitioner and I like doing martial arts. And within martial arts, you're taught not to use negative energy, but to use the passion, what we call the passion, to strike, as Bruce Lee would say, with intent.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, some martial arts you could see that like in karate, you could see guys that are getting older. Their hands are like, they're getting worn out because of how they force themselves with emotion to strike.
You're talking about the internal and the soft way versus the external and hard way.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And because we as humans, we kind of do that to ourselves sometimes. If I'm not mistaken, how I see my reality is that we sometimes do that to ourselves without like. And my question is, how can one apply this knowledge to our daily life? Because we may not have an understanding of how that works internally, but we have emotions externally because we have facial expressions and our our mannerisms and our body language.
So you've got a really big statement question there.
Yes.
And the first thing to understand is the internal soft way humanity doesn't know, and they should be taught that way at the youngest of age. Now, mothers and fathers' journey with young babies is to be the internal soft way. And then as the child grows in strength and potency, you learn the hard way, which would be walking, climbing, and getting spatial awareness, so that the balance of the hard way and the soft way can be given as the first sets of choices for the child's experience. Now, martial arts takes a way at looking at a fighting style, defensive style, or exercise style that helps you re-enter that state so that you can be a conscious practitioner of that state versus it being trained into you at a very young age. Now, martial arts now is teaching modern people how to reconnect to that state of beingness, which when practiced and has a lot of energy of awareness behind the practice that its nature, it can give us very potent capacity to use our energy to do unique body modifications, unique psychic experiences, or great motivations and inspirations to create manifestations of words, songs, speeches, etc. And that motivation state uses the journey of emotions as fuel.
Yes. And I understand that.
The balance of hard and soft.
Right. Because I understand that through consort of Vajrayana Buddhism that's helping me, because you have, for instance, a female energy and then you have the masculine energy. And in that balance of both is what is helping you look at your internal and finding your external and combining them so you could see your whole.
Well, you would need a good amount of education into traditional Chinese medicine to measure yourself from that perspective.
Oh,
and
right.
If you don't have that innate growing up, like a lot of Chinese know what feng shui is, the feng shui master comes around every year and tells your parents to fix shit. Okay, if you've never had that in a culture, it's not ingrained into you. Feng shui and numerology is a huge part of Asiatic life, which defined their hard and soft techniques.
Right.
What type of room to practice soft techniques and what type of room to practice hard techniques. The type of wood and floor matting was ingrained into the belief journey.
Right.
So when another culture tries to reperceive that and to gauge and measure where you're at between the balance of the yin and the yang energy is ultimately traditional Chinese medicine. That is what the practitioners and doctors of that time helped people do. They knew that everyone was masculine and feminine energy, and there were times that there was rare masculine energy that can create distortions in feminine frequencies. Or the yin and the yang is not about masculine or feminine, it's about creation and distortion, or creation and destruction.
Right.
The primordial sources.
And so how is emotions tied in all this as the topic of the discussion?
Well, it started with primordial. What are the primordial emotions that we can manage as fuel, as instant access to fuel sources? That's why they're there. Instant access to fuel sources.
So these fuel sources, would it be love and fear or love and hate?
Anything. It can be any combination of anything, not even in perception yet. Anything that's a motivation to move energy.
And so how can one potentialize this? How can we learn to do this?
Be the flow. Entering that state of flow without resistance. And knowing that when we're in the state of flow, that our knowingness is an expanding process. And the more that we go to the edge of our own knowingness with our conscious will and choice, the more we expand our knowingness.
Right, because when I was a monk, I studied Shingon Buddhism in Japan, and they would always tell us, you are going to the clear light. Even Tibetan Buddhism talks about this, that it's a calming of the mind where your emotions are in a Zen type of balance where you are just at peace. You're neither exalted or you're not overly happy. Those extremes are not
right. That is the sacred neutral experience. They just experience it a different way.
Right. Yeah, I got to experience a little bit of it because I was there for 5 years and 3 months of my life.
Mm-hmm. What brought you there?
A trip to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
High
and then
school.
you just decided you want to stay?
Yes, basically without telling my parents.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been a hell of a journey.
Yes, it was, sir.
Yes.
I asked all this because, like, emotions, Shingon is very much rooted in emotions. And it's a beautiful topic because sometimes we lose control of our emotions within situations, and sometimes we lean towards our baser emotions, and we get angry. We want to have control. We base these emotions on exuding control over somebody or trying to make ourselves look better. And it's just wondering, well, how can we help ourselves when we see that to turn it and help others, be at a calm state.
Martina, you want to try that one?
Yeah, I'd like to say that emotions, energies in motion, are innately neutral. Yeah, it's just that right and wrongness that we attach to it that gives it a meaning, if you wish, that can backfire on us. And it all comes down to non-judgment. We don't have to judge the anger. We don't have to judge the fear. We don't have to judge anything. And as we come out of having a conclusive point of view about whatever the emotion is supposed to be or not, we're actually neutralizing it automatically.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
And I had a question too about how the topic of inner earth was brought up. And I understand inner earth, meaning the Agartha kingdom and its capital Shambhala, which I practice the Kala chakra. And I wanted to ask, how is the teachings of the Kala chakra, are they manifest here on earth, or is it in an etheric realm? Because you hear about how you guys are
Hollow Earth is split up in a variety of ways. So those who have learned to live without bodies, they live between the spaces of atoms as energetic beings, therefore have access to infinite space. And those that have reached a high level of high frequency and spiritual density, but still require bodies. The ones that still require bodies have teleportation and ship technology, and they can operate a cavern system or an underwater, above water cavern-based system that can be thousands of kilometers long and wide and have very unique technologies that can maintain a bubble of reality equal to what those species are. And it's split 50-50 between embodied and disembodied down there. And there are well over 10,000 species, each with their own ideology. Now, the one you're referring to, the Shambhala teachings, it is a unique time in human history where Earth was under very powerful time travel assault, and that bastion of hope and frequency survived as the greater teachings of re-experiencing oneness post-cataclysmic experiences, because we had gone through a series of cataclysmic reality-altering events.
Oh, and because you hear about how the last avatar, the Kalki avatar of Lord Krishna is going to come out, because you hear about how, like, in the prophecies there's going to be like a great war, and
we already had the great war. It's an economic war.
It's an economic war.
It's an economic war, and I think there isn't one Krishna energy to come up. I think there are tens of thousands of them.
Oh,
The last time we had Christ popping up in roughly, as time of the story of Jesus Christ, I have always said there was never one Jesus Christ. There are 8,400 of them simultaneously born around the world. And I believe the same thing happens with this Krishna experience. There's thousands of them are being born, because a being that is that potent and powerful can live thousands of lifetimes simultaneously.
yeah, I hear that within, like, the Hindu aspect of all these teachings, that even Lord Buddha was recognized as a avatar.
Yes, as a great avatar, right, in the pantheon up there.
But how does this all, and I asked this, but how does that all, because, I practice the Kala chakra. It's part of my Vajrayogini and Chakra Samvara teachings. I also include the Kala chakra. But how does all those teachings help us to manifest what, like, the energies of understanding how, like, when you mentioned time travel and...
So first thing first, those teachings come from a time where natural living was normal.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So the perspective of where they come from themselves and how they were written defines how unique of an experience you can have. The limitations are limitless other than your perceptions.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I understand it completely. Yes.
It's all about the creation we have in the moment and what we do with it. And are we of contribution and service to the greater whole?
Right, because we're in service, we're in bhakti within all of creation, for Source, to take back what lessons that we learned from Source.
Right, and to teach them to the rest of Source's children.
Right, thank you, yes.
Who don't know their sources yet.
And is that why we're brought back here? Because within the teachings, it may sound negative, but they say that Earth is like a prison planet, that we come here.
Earth is not a prison planet. It's a source. It's a source disconnection school.
So source disconnection school. Thank you.
Yes.
I heard that too from from Laura too, and if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm the one that is stated from that Earth is a source disconnection school, and that you're here to learn the infinite amount of ways of source disconnection. And once you learn the infinite amount of ways of source disconnection, you have the opposite teachings, the source of source connection again.
And so does that start with understanding our emotions,
It may not start that way with everyone. Not everyone has the issues with their emotions. So there are other people that have issue with the energy of ancestral values or what was done in the history past versus an emotional charge to it.
Well, is that way we have righteous, righteous, how we want to stand up for rights and...
So there's a different process between activism and righteousness. Righteousness can easily deform itself into something negative. That doesn't mean it always does it. It just easily can be deformed. When one maintains pure righteousness without judgment, you achieve an enlightened state where instant forgiveness for actions being done can happen.
Right. Yes.
It's how a lot of the grandmasters exist, because the younglings don't realize how destructive their negative chaotic energy is to powerful beings.
Right. And so within our our day-to-day life, how can we learn to apply this and come to realize this, what you just talked about?
Applying any of the teachings daily. Until such a time the daily practice becomes an enthusiastic effort to become weekly, monthly, and yearly, in which you have regular moments of hindsight and foresight, where the main goal of mastering hindsight and foresight is why we do the daily practice.
Right.
And from there, we can learn many unique ways of individualizing the emotional experience or non-emotional experience we're resolving.
Wow. Yeah, that's like the paramitra. We call it the paramita of joyful effort.
Mm-hmm. And again, that was written at a time where our world was vastly different. Okay.
Yeah, because I find it odd sometimes, and I'm growing to understand what you're telling me, because it seems that back in those days everything was different than it is now.
Yeah.
And you read like the sutras, and they're very contradicting.
Yes, they can be very contradicting because we don't understand the base source and how connected they were to sexual energies. And that sexual ritualization without penetration was very much a part of their magical process as priests.
Yes.
Okay, which is not practiced in modern day, therefore can be easily misinterpreted.
Right. Yes, because you could start saying like you have instances of abuse maybe where the person is not ready, and the so-called master wants to push somebody into doing something that person is not ready for.
Right. It's why a lot of the hard forms survived, because the masters were hard-ass control nuts, and the soft forms diminished.
Oh, wow. And is there like within the Akashic Records for us to find these teachings again if somebody is so willing?
In the records, yes, but they're also there in the teachings.
I ask because I struggle to find them.
It's a matter of pattern recognition.
I see.
If you combined all the hermetical texts of the world, they all share like 12 common themes. Okay? Of resolution to the great question of life. Each one just has a different generational perspective on it.
But so our generational is an interpretation, isn't it?
And every generation reinterprets the interpretation, which is the failure of our greater culture.
Since it's been diluted, I'm assuming.
Right, and it doesn't allow for natural reform.
Wow. Because I asked all this because I have experienced that before, and I always wondered why that is true, and you just clarified it for me.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I asked, how can we start applying there again?
Whatever technique floats your boat in the moment, and as long as there's not instant gratification, do. Got a plethora of doings, so you have knowing.
Right, but when does that be? Well, when do you center ourselves so it doesn't become ego-based?
Ego's always going to be on that journey until we retask the ego for a new purpose, and we no longer need to battle and compete with it.
Oh, I see.
Thanks a lot for calling in, guy. Hey, you were a really cool caller.
Thank you so much for your time and explanation. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, brother. Martina, is there anything you'd like to add there?
No, I don't think there's anything to add. Thank you. I think
All right, so let's call it an end. Yeah, let's call it an end to a show. Let's have people get a hold of you.
Yep. Synchronistic, here we go. Synchronistic.co.uk. And then we've got earthniveau.com, our weekly Zooms where us consciousness explorers get together and we inspire and teach each other and learn from each other.
Wonderful. And you guys know who I am. You can get a hold of me at andrewbartzis.com. We will be back this Thursday for another call-in show. And then this Friday, we will be having our comedy show with Monty Dean. All right, Robert, take us away.
each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge, it's the Holy Grail.
Improvise. Mysterious.
It's counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.
Hello, let's create, let's co-create, and let's change this world with love. No matter if you're from Alpha Centauri or Earth, we all began with the same birthing process. We live in a limited point of view. Living the mystical life daily is about striving for the unlimited point of view. Each day, each human being gets an infinite amount of choices. Living the mystical life daily is about facing obstacles and challenges. The level of awareness that you are working at means you have a responsibility to be equal with it. How does one truly let go of expectation? You can make the moment that you wake up to the moment you go to sleep sacred. The keys to success: choice, 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 and choice.